Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solution Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we talk with leaders in the Retail IT channel about their leadership journeys and what they've learned along the way. Today, we're going to focus on what two leaders learned just a couple weeks ago at RSPA's RetailNOW 2025 Trade Show and Education Conference held July 27th through 29th at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. So we have two special guests. The first is Mike Monocello. He's an RSPA board member and the co-founder of DevPro Journal and Managed Services Journal, an industry-focused media properties that are launched in 2018. Before launching that business for 10 years, Mike wrote for Business Solutions Magazine, where he became chief editor. And before that, for 5 years, he was a VAR in Erie, Pennsylvania. If you're saying, where have I heard Erie before? If you're watching our YouTube channel, you might be able to see the Erie jersey over my shoulder. That is not Mike's jersey, but we do share the same hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Jim.
Nope, always a pleasure. Our second special guest is Carl Boutet. He's an RSPA board advisor, business strategist, executive advisor, and the founder of Studio RX. Carl has over 20 years of retail leadership experience, including 10 years with Costco Wholesale, as well as leading the development of commercial applications for a global B2B security company. Carl is also a Rethink Retail top retail expert, the principal advisor for the McGill University Retail Innovation Lab in Montreal, a course instructor at McGill Masters in Retail Innovation, and an adjunct digital marketing faculty at the Asian Institute of Technology MBA School of Management. Carl, it is great to have you on the Trusted Advisor.
A real pleasure, Jim. Looking forward to this.
I'm looking forward to it as well, because I really am curious to get both of your takes on Retail Now. But before we get to like the specific takeaways from it, what are your general reactions to the event? And so, Mike, you've attended Retail Now for most of the past 20 years. I'm curious, your first thoughts on this year's show compared to past years and what you've seen.
Yeah, I carry around a notebook. I'm always jotting down little like one-word things. In the end, I kind of have like almost like a word cloud that I create for the event. And I was scanning through it before this call, trying to identify themes or recurring words that popped up in my notebook. And I've got it off to the left here. So if you see me looking over here, that's what it is. Number one, from like a new perspective, things that I've noticed, how it compared to previous years would be fresh young faces. I know, going back 20 years, that Retail Now was known as like the association was like a good old boy network. There were a lot of people that had been in part of the association for a long, long time. That's still the case. There are still those people there, and that's part of the amazing DNA. But boy, there are a lot of young people that are now actively involved in the RSPA, and that's really exciting. Even just talking about the board meeting that we had before the event started, got a lot of really young, talented people who are on the board and people who are running for the board as well. I mean, really young people that are bringing in a lot of energy, new ideas, et cetera. So that's exciting to me as a different. I don't know if you want to talk about each one of these separately or I'm going to keep talking, but I can keep going.
Yeah, well, I wanted to get your overall take. We're going to dive into specific takes when we get to it. But I will say, just to follow up on that, you remember former RSPA President CEO Joe Finizio would talk about the short tie guys. Do you remember that? Like the guys whose ties only came down to here, and they had been in the business, in the industry for many, many years. But I guess a big thing was they weren't looking to grow their business, right? They were a dealer for whether it was Micros or NCR or somebody else. Yeah. But they were just saying, hey, I'm back here to get together with my friends. It sounds like what you were seeing is a young but also a hungry group of individuals.
Absolutely. And then related to like under the new category would be the show floor technology wise and solution wise has really evolved. And I think that that's just the nature of technology. But going back 20 years, yeah, we've seen the evolution in the retail space where, you used to walk around and it was cash drawers and receipt printers and
Full
basic,
displays.
point of sale. Yeah, very. I mean, that those were the solutions back then. Then we saw the payments companies coming in, but now, boy, the show floor is just very. The categories of technologies are very broad. You've got security solutions, networking solutions. You've got people that are providing marketing assistance. I mean, there's just a variety of different types of exhibitors, which I think really enriches the overall show in terms of, I know as a former VAR, and I spoke to many of the attendees. What are you looking for? What do and a lot of times people go to the show, they don't necessarily even know what they're looking for. They're looking for the next thing. So I believe the fact that Retail Now has such a variety of exhibitors now really just increases the likelihood that someone's going to run across something that they didn't even know they needed. Wow, I didn't even know that I could work with, AT&T for my, for wireless connectivity and all that stuff. So just seeing all these different companies, it's pretty exciting.
Excellent. And before I get to Carl, this will be a perfect segue to that. Is the RSPA actually changed our mission statement where it used to say point of sale industry in it, but we serve now the retail technology ecosystem because it's really broadened out, like you talked about, Mike. This is way beyond the POS. And that's a good segue to you, Carl. So, Carl, you don't come from the channel, right? This is your first Retail Now. You've attended a lot of Retail Now, a lot of retail shows and a lot of IT shows around the world. I'm curious your top of mind reaction to your time in Vegas for the first time at our RSPA Retail Now event.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank Mike for calling me young, fresh, and energizing. I think that's exciting. I haven't heard that in a long time. Oh, was it me you're talking about, Mike?
I was referring to the other people in the meeting.
Oh, okay. Wow. Listen, yeah, I mean, I guess my first reaction is what took me so long, to get to this show, because as you mentioned, I've traveled the world to do these different retail, broader retail and more specific technology shows. From London to Bangkok to Cairo, like I've been to Vegas quite a few times for some of those shows as well too, just not the RSPA. So I think the first thing that sort of struck me was the size of it. Quite honestly, I didn't realize that it was. I know you've talked a lot about it. I've heard, but I mean, I guess you have to live it to understand the impact it can have. Also build on Mike, because I was encouraged. It was one of my concerns is I felt that there was sort of a transition happening, and I was concerned is there enough fresh energy in the to keep these industries, and I've seen other shows where that's not the case. And this one was really reassuring, because even in retail, I often will say, you want to know if a retailer is going to be around 5-10 years from now, look who's in the room. If it's all 60-plus-year-old people, chances are if there's no support, no next generation coming in, it's not looking good for that retailer. And I'll say the same thing for the channel. So that was really, really encouraging, with some great ideas, and engaged, not just there to sort of be flies on the wall, but to actually participate and share quite proactively their ideas, which is, we need that. And that's critical to the success of any group. I'll say probably the thing that really is for me, one of the most interesting elements is to be at a retail show with no retailers, or almost none. That's different for me. Like, that's usually the thing. Most of these shows are looking for retailers, and the fact that this ecosystem, and I'll mention community later and build on that, but that it's really focused on this sort of self-supporting group that kind of works together and collaborates, I think is really interesting, because that's not the dynamic you get in any other show. Like, everybody's out to get their own, right? So I'm sure there's a bit of that going on as well too, which is healthy. Competition is necessary, but there's a lot more like, come and see this person, or you should see like this booth next to me. Like, okay, I'll talk to you about what I got, but you should see what they're doing too. Is really cool. Like, you don't see that very often anywhere else. It's usually each for their own. So it talks about the word association in the RSPA and what that builds on. But I'm looking forward to seeing more diversity. I was really also impressed by the international presence. I think in the current instability we have around the world right now, to see companies from Japan, or not just companies, people flying in from Japan, Korea, Germany. I mean, I had conversations with all those people. I thought that was fascinating as well. So yeah, kudos to the team. It was really for a first for me. It was I was really happy to spend a lot of time on the floor and speaking with all people, plus the content too, which we can get to a bit later.
Got it. Thank you, Carl. And to clarify the size of the event, we had nearly 1,600 registrants. It was the largest attendance since prior to COVID, so the largest we've had in 6 or 7 years. And the show floor is sold out, 174 exhibitors on the sold out show floor. And Carl, it's interesting you say about the international presence, because compared to prior years, it was actually down because of, like you said, all the uncertainty, let's say, that's going on in terms of there were fewer Canadians that were there. There were fewer folks from around the world, but there still were folks who were going through some of those extra hurdles and some of those concerns that others have had for the event. So hopefully next year will be even bigger from an international standpoint. So, okay,
J-
so thank you both for your
oh,
observations, Mike and Carl.
Jim,
Oh yeah,
Jim,
go
could
ahead.
I just say, well, I'm sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you, but
no,
I
no,
just want to
please.
add something to what Carl said, because, I was talking about all the new things that I was seeing and like fresh new faces and new technologies, but I just want to underscore something that Carl said, because the DNA of the RSPA and Retail Now, to me, that is similar over the 20 years is that community aspect. And I don't want to like just sell that short, because it's amazing. It really is to see this community come together and continually collaborate, share best practices. I mean, as I know you want to move on to where, like, let's get to the takeaways. A lot of the education is given from members to members. They're helping one another out. It's amazing. The I go to a lot of trade shows because our publications cover a broad variety of industries and technologies. I don't leave other shows feeling warm and fuzzy like I do Retail Now. Like that. So we give out industry awards. We celebrate ourselves, right? And Linda Sutterth from Epson retired, what, one
A
or
year
two
ago.
years ago?
Yep.
A year ago. We brought her back, gave her a very nice award for
Life
all
Member
her,
Award. Yep.
yeah, for all of her time spent. She was obviously so touched. Everyone in that room was touched. It's amazing to be able to do that. And like, you really do form really good relationships in this association. You get out of it what you put into it. And a lot of people are putting a lot into it and building really a really strong community. So anyway,
And
just wanted to
I
add
I
that.
appreciate you saying that, because we got a lot of positive feedback from folks who've been going to the event for years, that they say, "Man, I just love this community," like you said. But then I'm always concerned about people who are showing up for the first time. Do they feel like, well, good for them that they've got a bunch of buddies and feel it? But boy, there were so many new people there who were sharing with us. I feel so welcome here. I've never felt so welcome. And so, Mike, I'm happy to pull on this community string a little longer if you want. And Carl, I want to get your take, since it was your second event. You went to the Inspire Leadership Conference in January of this year. But I guess, can you talk about your sense of community
Yeah.
based on being a first timer?
Well, and I even posted about that. I think that's you sort of it made that come to life for me. For first of all, Inspire was that first touch. I was like, Mike, this is like, yeah, this is a tight knit, but it was a smaller event. These were like, you could tell that the meshing would happen easier, although the sharing was really incredible, because I think it was one of the key takeaways that inspired everybody getting up and speaking at the at the mic after each session and sort of sharing, and that set the stage. But in the post I mentioned how the difference between ecosystem and community is sort of that personal investment. It's the fact that you are going. There's an emotional element to it. Ecosystems are technical, and I'm a big fan of ecosystems. The idea that our in retail world is becoming more and more ecosystem driven, which is great. That means the technology sort of plays nice together. But there's a difference between playing nice and emotionally involving yourself in the common success of that ecosystem. And for me, that's the word community. That's sort of the definition of it, is that there's this bond that goes deeper than just, does my API work with your tech stack? So that's what I felt from that. And again, something that's really unique. And maybe it comes from the fact that there's no retailers there, and it's just channel partners that are there. And that's the nature of that, which is new to me. So that was really, really nice. I mean, the only other place you see communities like that are things that are super regional, usually, where everybody sort of knows each other and their kids go to school together. I mean, you almost need that level to get to that kind of bond that I saw in Vegas a couple of weeks ago.
Interesting. Well, I'd say thank you guys both for building on that point, because our listeners know I've talked about the flywheel a lot. We did an episode on the flywheel. If you search RSPA flywheel, you're going to see some blog posts on it. And with both you guys being on the board, one of my takeaways from Retail Now, from an internal standpoint, we have on our flywheel number 4 is about helping people find success, like in profits and sales and all that stuff. And we're thinking about adding to it, like, and like not only getting the ROI and everything, but and a sense of belonging and a sense of community that came out of this event. Like that seems to be part of the special sauce of what the show and what the association has to offer. It's not just a math equation. I spend this much time and whatever, and I get this much out of it. But it's also what you guys are talking about, feeling better about the industry, feeling more confident, like you said, Mike, warm and fuzzy. I know for people who haven't experienced it, they're probably like, I'm not sure what these guys are talking about. But right, by all means, come to one of these events and you'll see the sense of genuine community, which is not very common in the B2B space. That's for sure. So,
Yeah.
All right, you guys ready to move into the hard and fast takeaways from the event?
Let's go.
Sure.
All right, here we go. So I'm hoping each of us can share our top like takeaways from the event, and then we can talk about them a little bit. So Mike, if you can talk about your number one takeaway from Retail Now 2025, and I know you did some writing on this, so I kind of got, I guess, a little bit of cheat sheet in that advance for what you published in DevPro Journal right after. But talk to our audience about like your number one takeaway from the show.
Yeah, so I called an audible here on myself right before this call. I thought I was going to be talking about AI, but then I thought, I'm sure we'll talk about AI on this call. I try to, when I'm at these events, it's challenging for me because I'm wearing multiple hats, right? I still think, I try to think like a VAR, I try to think like an ISV. Our publications cover both of those audiences, so I'm trying to understand what makes sense for them. I'm also, a business owner, so what makes sense for me? I obviously paid a lot of attention to AI, and we could talk about that later. But to me, that there's something that I just got picked up this theme a couple times, and I think it's just something that I want to keep an eye on, and I think everyone in the industry should keep an eye on, and that's the data monetization thing. It might be a surprise for me to bring it up here, but you know we saw this thing happen in the point of sale space where payment processing got involved, and all of a sudden POS became free because they just wanted access to the credit card processing. And I see something similar happening here where POS is already kind of free thanks to the payment processing, but now this data is really valuable, and companies want access to that data. Specifically, we're talking merchant data, right? If you're a VAR or ISV listening, your merchants, your restaurants, your retailers, they've got all this data that they're collecting on their customers, and everyone wants it now. It's extremely valuable. And what I'm curious in, I mean, there's obviously legalities of accessing that data and using it responsibly, but from a channel perspective, who's getting paid for that data, and are our members getting paid? I know we've heard from software developers who are members of the RSPA who are actively trying to navigate this and figure it out right now. I'm worried about resellers who don't have as strong of a voice. Are they going to earn a piece of it, or are people just going to assume, well, you're getting a free POS that you can sell, you can mark up, you can add your services? But I would really like to see, I think it would be fair, since the reseller is bringing those relationships, that they have access to, tap into any kind of monetization that takes place with that data. I don't have any takeaways right now, other than if you're a VAR or an ISV, I'd be paying close attention to what's happening with this, speaking to your partners and understanding how they might be monetizing data and how you might be able to participate in that, if at all.
Yeah, Mike, this reminds me, and I think you and I were both in the room for like a vendor working group meeting that happened prior to Inspire. This is the whole recurring revenue trend. And for those who don't know, Mike and I both worked together at Business Solutions Magazine, and we were very much pushing what we saw over in the managed services space about recurring revenue. We were essentially ambassadors for that business model in the POS space. But everybody remember, who holds the paper? I remember that. And you're talking about like, who's going to get paid on this, right? There are big, giant questions that we need need to ask. We don't have all the answers right now, but we have to ask those questions related to data monetization. Carl, what's your take on data monetization? This might be something that is more
Yeah,
up your alley, and I'm curious what you're hearing about it and how you feel that works with the audience you just met at Retail Now.
yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting point, especially in this category. My read is we're sort of serving a mid-market that's kind of not, I won't say blind to this, but not as exposed to the opportunity as the larger groups that you mentioned. I spent a decade inside of Costco with it was actually my own business. So I was capturing my own data within Costco, but it was my business with my staff inside selling technology inside of Costco across Canada. And and so I saw, it was sort of a pivotal moment for me, as I saw from the inside. I actually helped them launch their e-com as well. So I saw the beast from the inside, right, and the resources at their disposal, which was really a challenge for the smaller mid-market, where I spent the next 6-7 years supporting that group, independent retailers trying to understand their digital transformation. And I kept on talking about sort of leveling the playing field. And the interesting thing that's happened over the last decade is the technology has sort of commoditized some of that access. It's made it more, anyways, you don't need a team of data scientists in your company anymore to be able to leverage some of those opportunities. I mean, I went back to school about a little over a decade ago just for that, because I wanted to learn about this thing called big data. And I was curious. I was very analytical, so I wanted to see where that was going. And we were just talking at that time about using unstructured data, which is a fancy word for saying picking up data a bit everywhere, which retail is notorious for, because we have data spread across our organization at all sorts of different touch points. POS sort of being the richest piece of that, because that's the transactional data. That's the data that generates the most interest and the most value. So to see now that the small mid-market starting to be able to look at that and say, okay, I need to diversify my revenue model. I cannot survive as a retailer only as a margin plus business, which is traditional. I say I can't. I'm maybe exaggerating a bit, but it's getting harder and harder, because the big players are coming in and finding new sources of revenue all around them, from media to data monetization to every sort of touch point. They're finding ways to make money on top of whatever margin they can get by with of selling that product. So as a solution provider, what is our role to come in and support that monetization? How can we help those retailers? And I say retail in the broadest sense, obviously, I'm including hospitality, I'm including anybody who's dealing with customer or consumer data. So I mean, I'm really excited about that. And just to know that the RSPA is sort of leading the charge on that and having people think about those things, for me, is super important, because I'm always sort of more concerned now about the big players are fine. Like, okay, there's a couple out there that are struggling, their issue. The smaller players, which are really the fabric of our communities, not broader community, not just the technology one, but the cities we live in, they need that support, and they need to have sort of access to solutions that are going to help them stay competitive. And data monetization it sounds sophisticated. Maybe we even need to think about the terminology, because it could be intimidating to some. Say, wow, that sounds like something only really the fancy people can do. I sell a solution, I sell a technology. Well, guess what? Your solution, your technology is an important piece in that puzzle that you're going to have to help the retailers sort of capture that value. It's going to be more than just being able to do payment processing. There's going to be a lot more information that's going to tie into that, especially as the technology evolves. And yes, the infamous AI, two letters come into play, and how they tie into all this, and hopefully democratize it even further, so that we can become a leveler of playing fields, which I think is really important.
Interesting you say that. And so Mike and Carl are aware of what I'm going to tell our audience right now, because they were in the board meeting. One of the big takeaways from our board meeting that we held right before the beginning of Retail Now was the RSPA is going to form an AI advisory group that's going to be a spinoff of our emerging technologies advisory group, bringing together folks in our industry who know AI and who are able to see around the corner. And then we're also talking about bringing in some folks from the outside, potentially, like you said, Carl, those data scientists. But I think you might have been the one who brought up in the board meeting, those folks are really, really in demand right now. So it might be hard to bring some of those folks in, but we're very much in the early stages of that. But the RSPA is going to be a resource for our members, so they can, as we said at the beginning of this podcast, lean on each other and work with each other and pick each other's brains to see what the best practices are. So, all right. So data monetization, that was Mike's number one takeaway from the event. Carl, let's talk about yours and then get Mike's reaction. So Carl, what was your number one takeaway from your first Retail Now?
It's hard just to put one, but I'll sort of step it back a bit because usually these shows, like I'll point to the obvious one, like the NRF show in January, like every booth had AI in big letters on it, and it was almost refreshing not to see that. And somebody said, well, does that make it that they're behind? I think it makes it more realistic. I mean, I till recently and still will in some cases recommend retailers run the other way when a vendor starts screaming AI at them, because I would say they probably have no idea what they're talking about. So the sort of the discipline of the vendor community and kind of the channel partners coming in and saying, yes, we have AI in there. It's not the thing we're flashing the first. We're talking to you what it is we actually do, how we can accomplish, how we can support your I'll call it the tech stack, but whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Obviously, sort of centered around the point of sale, but I saw some HR, I saw some other interesting technologies, which I hope we'll see more of that diversity, because I think we need that, not just the geographic diversity, but the technological diversity, as the lines I keep talking about are blurring between digital and physical. The whole technology realm is blurring as well too, and who does what. But that sort of, I'll call it the discipline or the maturity of saying, well, yeah, we have AI, it's part of that. And a couple of booths were promoting that more, was more like, let's forget about AI for a second. What is it you actually need to do? Because back to NRF, I brought my son for his first show, and he was walking. He's like, Carl, all these booths look the same. They're like, Daddy, though, what's going? Like, do they all do AI? Like, was that all they do? Like, no, they each have sort of, they're playing it, but they're using it as marketing speak. And the fact that we're not just using it as marketing speak, that it's part of the equation. There's a lot of questions about it. There's no doubt that everybody's looking at it and has a million questions. And you mentioned, as the board, we have to reflect on that and make sure that we're shining a bright enough light down that alley, because the analogy I've been using is like saying you're 1905 and you're ignoring electricity. You're like, this electricity thing, sure, my competitor is using it, but I'm doing fine with steam. Like, I don't so how do we help the vendors sort of make it down that road? But there's a discipline to it, and there's hype, and there's reality. So we need to, I was, I guess my number one takeaway was pleased with the maturity I saw around that, and the sort of the reality of the conversations, which is, I guess, typical for this channel as well too, because they can't be running in all sorts of directions. They need to stay focused for their customers, and that's key.
Interesting. So your number one takeaway is about the discipline and maturity for practical applications. Mike, what's your reaction to Carl's observation there?
I was going to say exactly what Carl just said at the end there. You look at NRF, and that's historically a show that people are wheeling out the latest and greatest. They're trying to impress investors. They're using all these, whatever the latest buzzword is, it's all glitz and glamour and the latest and greatest. Our show services the small to mid-size markets where you need to have proven technologies. Our members are trying to solve real business problems, and they can't afford to chase vaporware or all these really expensive latest and greatest things. They need solutions that are addressing the needs of the market. And so I'm sure that every single exhibitor is leveraging AI in some way. They're baking it in their products. That's not what they're leading with, though. They're leading with solutions that are going to solve business problems and help members, address those problems. So that's kind of my quick reaction on what Carl said there.
Yeah, it's almost like a channel is the filter between the aspirations and the reality of it. I still remember going to a distributor event. This is several years ago, and they had a closing panel, and they had a VAR MSP up on stage. And he said, like, as they were wrapping up, he said, "Hey, did anybody see well, first, is the vendor here who had the 3D digital signage? Are they in the room? Good. Who the hell is going to use that? What is the application of that thing? Like, it's neat and cool, whatever, but no store's ever going to put that in. That's insane." And that's kind of how, I guess, Mike, if I can get your reaction to it, that's kind of what this industry is all about. It's like, if you try to go in there and lead with a bunch of BS or highfalutin marketing speak, people are going to be like, bah, like, it's not how the world really works. Let me explain it to you, son. I guess, is that kind of what you have seen over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are people with, new shiny things that show up, and, it's good to know what's coming down the road, and what's going to be available. But again, I think RSPA members need like we said, proven technologies that are going to solve solutions. And so it might not be, here's how it's more like, here's how we're leveraging AI to make improvements to our software in really subtle ways that are going to improve your customers. And we don't need to lead with that or make it seem like we're handing over the keys to AI to just run our entire operation or something like that. But, just small changes that are effective.
Got it. Carl, before we take a commercial break, I want to get your final take on
Yeah, well,
this
I mean, I
topic
got to
about
put, I do teach emerging technologies and new business models. So as much as I said, the maturity and the discipline is really important. I think we still need to be, cautious not to throw everything out, because I've seen these waves happen before, where I'll give the famous example of the metaverse, which everybody was very excited about. And like, was AI just the next metaverse, or is it the next Web3 or crypto, or, things that have come and gone, especially the metaverse analogy. And I always be cautious, because some of these technologies are signals, and they're maybe not the entire signal, but they are pieces of it. And I don't think nobody can afford to completely push them aside either, especially not in the case of AI. So I don't think anybody really is, but I'm just saying, there's maturity, but there's also curiosity, and finding that right balance, and saying, okay, I'm staying ahead of it. Maybe the 3D sign isn't for me now, but chances are I know I'm gonna have to maybe up my signage game at some point, because I'm looking at my competitors, and my store is feeling pretty static right now, and I need to give something for create a little more energy in my space. So maybe not 3D doesn't necessarily need to be 3D. 2D might be fine, but still, like, again, there's pieces in there. And so I think as an association as well, we need to be careful not to just push any technology to the side, because even though if 80% of it's not going to work, maybe there's a 20 in there that's still going to be important and create a lot of value. So anyways, that's my caveat.
Yeah, it says an RSPA member told me after what they saw at Retail Now, or not at Retail Now, at NRF, they said, what I hear about AI, 80% of it is a bunch of hot air, but the other 20% is absolutely amazing. So, and as another RSPA member said, I've always got to be on one hand solving problems, but part of me always has to be exploring as well, right? It's not an either or. You've got to be able to balance those two things. All right, before we get more takeaways from Carl and Mike, let's pause here to let our listeners and viewers know about the aforementioned RSPA, the Retail Solutions Providers Association. It's North America's largest community of retail technology VARs, software providers, vendors, and distributors. To accelerate your success through an RSPA membership, which is more affordable than you might think, email membership@gorspa.org. Also, thanks to these companies who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our platinum sponsor for 2025 is Blue Star, and our gold sponsors are CoCard, Epson, Heartland, and ScanSource. And then finally, save the date for Inspire 2026, the Retail IT Channel's premier leadership conference. RSPA Inspire is set for February 1st through 4th on the beautiful island of Kauai, Hawaii. For more information, visit gorspa.org/inspire so you can experience networking nirvana. And I need to commit to memory how to spell Kauai going forward, because we'll be promoting that for the next few months. So, all right, let's each talk about one more takeaway. And Carl, why don't you go first this time? What's something else that stood out to you? Do you think our listeners should think about or should do based on what you saw at Retail Now?
I'm trying to find, I kind of building on the last point, but I think it's an important sort of clarification, is this balance, as well as the solutions and the blurring, and the idea that, maybe we are focused on payment processing, but what is it with the relationship and the trust that I have with my customer, that I can bring, even more value to that relationship. And I think we're going to have to get to a place where we feel a little more comfortable outside of the payment processing realm. So how do we diversify our product offering? Like our retailers, I said earlier, are trying to diversify their revenue models. I think probably the associate, and I'm seeing a bit of that. I mean, you mentioned our the platinum sponsor, Blue Star, having robotics, for instance. And I'm not going to say that everybody's got to go out and become a reseller of robotics, but it is something like, if the payment processing is, we talked about this before, becoming rapidly commoditized, where's the margin? Where's the opportunity? How do I leverage these great relationships where the retailer looks at me as a trusted advisor, as this series is called, and say, Carl, what do you know about, robotics? Like, okay, I don't know much about him. I have one supplier that's starting to touch on that. Maybe I can find out more for you, and I'll educate myself. And hey, guess what? There's maybe an opportunity for us to explore together. Or no, this is a little too far out of my field, and I'm more comfortable talking about signage, or I'm more comfortable talking about, like, I don't think everybody's going to become the solution for everything, but I think there's that blurring and sort of building on that trust, saying, listen, I understand your business. I've been selling into this business for the last 20 years. I've grown, I've matured with your business, and you're evolving. I need to evolve as well too. Let's take a look together and see where is that value going to be created. And Mike, I think was referencing it earlier, and as well in the NRF, when they say that 20% of what works, that's often around optimization. It's it's all about, how do I get better with what I already have? How do I get more value out of my business? How do I create more meaningful engagement with my customers? So I'm always looking at it from the retailer perspective, but obviously we're supporting that. And what is it? What are those solutions? Because we are the Solution Providers Association. What are those solutions that are going to help complement and make sure that we're still doing payment processing at the end of the day? Because that's the big question: is if we're not as relevant, we're going to be just doing less payment processing, and the whole thing falls apart anyway. So how do we make sure that our clients have payment to process?
Interesting. Mike, what is your take on that? Like Carl said, he's got the retailer's perspective. You've got the VAR's perspective. What's your reaction to Carl's observation there?
Well, we started by talking about how I've been coming to the show for 20 years or whatever, and seeing this evolution of the membership. Jim, you also mentioned how we were proponents of recurring revenue, and essentially what that boils down to is, these members over the past 20 years have had to adjust their model, and in many different ways. It has been slow, but it is happening. And I agree 100% with what Carl's saying in terms of these members. Our members need to be trusted advisors. In order to be a trusted advisor, you can't just be selling one piece of a solution. You can't just say, I sell some hardware and the software and that's it, and I get the payment processing residuals. You really, in today's day and age, need to be looking at, you need to understand your customer's business better than they do. You need to know where they can be gaining efficiencies. You need to be asking them questions that they haven't even thought to ask themselves, and then apply solutions that, again, they wouldn't even be on their radar. So going back to what I said earlier about seeing all these different exhibitors at Retail Now, it's nice that, I said people were walking around saying like, wow, I didn't even know I could be offering this. And it's important for, if you're going to be a trusted advisor, a total solution provider, to truly be offering total and complete solutions. You never know what's going to happen. Payment processing residuals have kind of shrunk a little bit over the years, like a race to the bottom. It's still a very good revenue stream. I know many people just have their entire businesses based on that, but who knows what's going to happen. And so you should also be looking at where the next revenue streams could be. Getting into additional managed services, right? We talk about this all the time, Jim, and that'll be, we could segue into my second takeaway would be offering something like security services, et cetera. Business continuity. There's video surveillance, robotics in the future, digital signage. I mean, there are so many different technologies that retailers, generically can use and meet and could benefit from, that our members could be offering.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So keep building upon that, Mike, if that's your next takeaway. And it seems like, if Carl's talking about delivering those solutions, and it ties right in with what you just said, that you can't just be, remember we did that cover that had the POS VAR is dead, because it's not just a POS VAR anymore. You have to expand. I guess, can you expand upon that expansion and putting yourself in the shoes of a VAR? I know they say, hey, when I add a new product, then I have to train my techs, I have to train my sales team. We got to figure all these things out. Like, it is not like snapping your fingers and just bolting something on. So I guess talk about that from a, We talked about running it through the reality filter. Talk about that, Mike, in terms of how much you think of VARs should be biting off in order to offer more. So they've got to keep up pace with change, and they got to stay away from the people who are clawing at their heels, but they don't want to die from indigestion. I guess what's your take on that, if you could expand upon it?
Yeah, good point. Good point. I would say that depending on a VAR's appetite and capability, there are ways of getting involved to whatever level they want. So number one, I mean, there are partnership opportunities available, right? We have members who specialize in something that they could potentially partner with, and start offering some of these services that someone else might be helping them with. Managed services space, I guess my quick response, now that I'm talking this out, would be the managed services people figured it out, Jim. Why can't our people figure it out, right? I mean, they have how many recurring revenue services are on your list right now? Close to 50
I'm gonna have to look it up.
or
It might
more.
be more. It might be more than that. I'll look it up while you're
Yeah,
talking.
yeah. And managed services providers offer all these things. They figured out how to do it. So how do they do it? In some cases, like security services, there are vendors that offer SOC as a service. So like a security operations center as a service. You're losing a little bit of the money to them, but they're handling it all for you. You know, they've got specialists who sit there and that's all they do is like stare at, you know, incidents and, you know, identify what threats are and then, you know, solve problems. So, you know, you could partner with vendors who have figured this out and have programs and services that make it easy for you to adopt them would be number one. So partnership, and then also don't overlook your distributor partners. They offer a lot of value added services. They're not just, you know, shipping products. They offer a lot of things, site surveys, staging, other things that you could leverage that would add value to, you know, what you're providing your customers. So that's my quick response to that one.
Great. And to add to that, so what you were referring to, what Mike was referring to, the RSPA has produced over the years a list. It's called the Ultimate List of Recurring Revenue Products and Services for Retail Technology VARs. That is up to 57 now. So, Mike, we've
Okay.
matched Western Pennsylvania Proud Heinz Ketchup and their 57 varieties of recurring revenue services. So that's how I got to remember that a little
Yeah.
bit better. And before I turn it over to Carl, it's one guidance that I received at an RSP at a Retail Now breakout session. Anthony Presley from Time Forge and CBS North Star, he had very interesting: be a reseller of your core services and be a referral partner for things that are non-core, right? So you are representing and selling those, but instead of you necessarily becoming the expert, a lot of times the vendor, or like you said, Mike, the distributor, whoever, is who can handle a lot of the heavy lifting with that. So I thought that was a really interesting way in terms of from a partnership standpoint. You don't have to be a
Yeah.
reseller of everything. There are things you can refer. So I guess, Mike, you want to build on that before I turn it over to Carl?
Just one more thing on the security aspect and tying it back to the trusted advisor thing. I mean, I think all the reseller members would say like they aspire to be a trusted advisor, or they want to be, or they claim to be, but ultimately it comes down to proving that, and oftentimes you have to prove it in bad times, not just the good ones. So in the case of security, it's not a matter of if, it's when a breach occurs or some kind of security incident is going to happen. And I think oftentimes members think that, well, PCI, like the card data, that's out of scope, so I don't need to worry about that. That's not on me. And other security things, the data is in the cloud with my ISV, you know, the software company. I don't really need to worry about that too. So maybe they've got a firewall or something like that. But the fact is, whenever an incident occurs, if truly are the trusted advisor or pretend to be, they're going to get that call and they're going to have to deal with it. And the correct response is not to point the finger at someone else. The correct response is not to say, like, I don't really have a solution. You need to be prepared. Whether you want to be involved in security or not, I think you have to be. And so I sat in on one of the education sessions. I think it was TD Cynics gave it. It was really good. And they talked about, you know, there's internal and external security as well. these reseller members and our ISV members, they need to be protected as well, so they don't become a vector for an incident to their customers. A lot of people now, as they've evolved into managed services, are using PSA platforms like ConnectWise, and they just had a big incident where people were going through ConnectWise and gaining access to merchant systems. So you need to be protecting yourself as well as your customers. And then finally, on the security front, there are three different aspects of it. There's the technology, there's the process, and the people. And I think oftentimes the channel thinks just of the technology thing, but then there's the people and the process that are equally important, if not more. The people could come down to, just education, phishing simulation type tools that help educate your staff and your customers on these latest threats. AI is getting really, really good at coming up with scary, accurate phishing things where you get a phone call and it sounds like it's your boss telling you, hey, I need this, or, do this. And, if you're not skilled to identify those things or have some kind of education, it's going to be easier and easier for people to be duped. And then the last thing would be process. What happens when an incident occurs? That's oftentimes where companies can really fumble. So getting yourself or your customers back up and running, business continuity type things. These are services that you could offer that, frankly, you need to be doing these things anyway. So be prepared, you could have emails written. What happens when the customer calls? What are we going to say to them? Are we going to accept fault, or do we have a letter that our lawyer has pre-approved and that we can email out that kind of gives us some good legal footing? I don't know. There's a lot that goes into this, but it's clear to me. Clearly, the answer is not to say it's something we don't do.
Yes. You got to be, you said, to be the trusted advisor, you've got to wrap your arms around it. Carl, that was a lot that Mike and I were going back and forth about. What's your take on that from a retailer perspective? What's your reaction?
Actually, I'll give you my take as a strategist, because that's sort of my key thing. And I just, my own business model is very much predicated on being the trusted advisor on the strategy side. And what that usually means is I need to assemble a team whenever, somebody's coming to me and saying, here's, a particular challenge I have. And I sort of become the coordinator, and I bring in the other experts. I'm pretty good in data science, but I'm by no means a postdoc in data science. So if I need to go that deep, then I'll have those people around me, but I am still the front. I'm still ultimately accountable for, and the trust comes from me. And if something happens, and I love that Mike's bringing up the whole security piece, something I've spent a bit of time in, and kind of really exposed me to the depth of the channel. I could see the importance of that, and it's just growing day after day. As soon as we talk about any sort of technology that's being implemented more and more, the counterbalance of that is there's more and more risk tied to that security. So how do we manage that? And I think we have no choice. And maybe just sort of an extra insight around that. And been thinking, especially since the show and having seen on the floor what I saw, I think there's an opportunity here. I don't necessarily think we should go wide. I think there's an opportunity to go deep. And I think that's the idea. The difference is, you cannot be, the old saying I think my grandmother would say is, if you're all things to everybody, you're nothing to no one. So you want to kind of, focus in on a specific piece of the market that you're going to go really deep. And I saw some vendors say, we deal just in one ethnic hospitality or restaurant, like we focus just on that, but we can do everything for that group. So I think that's kind of an interesting angle right now. And some vendors are larger and they can go wider, but I think the majority of our members are probably focused on a segment, and they can become even more focused, hyper focused on a segment, but be able to go really deep with that relationship instead of spray and pray. Which we know as a strategy is working less and less because technology is allowing us to target better and better. So let's use that technology to make that targeting more effective and go deeper and build on those relationships by maybe bringing together and partnering with others to have that depth that's going to be more and more required, because that's just every business, every industry is going through the same challenge right now. And that is, how do we disrupt ourselves? The innovator's dilemma. How do we become we make sure we're still relevant relevant a couple of years from now, and having to sort of rethink how it is that we create value for our customers in the first place.
It's interesting you bring up disrupt ourselves, and I'll give you the last word on that, because that's what, like Mike had talked about, that's what the RSPA has done. It used to be more of a hardware show, and hardware is still an important component, but it's expanded well beyond that. I remember somebody who worked for a hardware company, then they retired, they came back last year as an advisor for somebody, and they were just laughing on the show floor, like, this has become a high-tech event. So I guess, Carl, can you take the final word before we wrap up today's episode on that topic?
Well, maybe not the most comforting words, but I think important ones around I personally think the point of sale is going away. So how do we prepare for that future where there is no longer a single point of sale, but it is points of sale that are spread through the customer journey? What's the tech stack look like that? How do we meet the customer? How do we support the retailer to meet the customer along that, where there's no longer the piggly wiggly cash register waiting at the end of the checkout line? So let's think about that future and prepare for it, while we still have runway to do that, and there's still going to be piggly wiggly checkout lines that are already over a century long for probably at least another decade or two, and some models are going to remain focused on that, but I think less and less of them are. So the tech stack is going to sort of blend into more and more software, that the hardware is going to be carried by the customer more and more. So it'll be interesting to see how we adapt to that.
Mike, can you imagine 10 years ago, somebody on an RSPA podcast? Well, first, the RSPA having a podcast 10 years ago, but can you imagine 10 years ago, someone saying the point of sale is going away, right? That would be, torches and pitchforks going after that guy.
Those are fighting words, yeah.
Yes. So, Mike, I guess I'll let you close it on that point in terms of, to your point, you've got to take on all those other services, because you can't just rely on the point of sale, because it's changing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know what more to say. I mean, it's to some people, I'm sure it is a scary proposition, but this is our current world that we're living in. I mean, things are changing so rapidly, and this is, I think we've weeded out the industry, and there's probably some people that will still leave who don't want to change, but those entering this market, I think, have an understanding now that things are changing rapidly, and they need to keep up with it. It's super exciting, though. I mean, yeah, maybe the traditional revenue streams aren't there, but gosh, if you get involved in this because you love technology or you love helping your customers, solve their business challenges, there's never been a better time. I mean, there's so many cool things coming up to play that it's definitely not boring.
Definitely not boring. Well, that does it for this episode of The Trusted Advisor, which we hope you found definitely not boring. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. Before we go, big thanks again to Mike Monocello and Carl Boutet for sharing their wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSPA Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, please visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.